Alexander Hartman sat quietly by the window of his luxurious penthouse in the heart of London, the dazzling city lights reflecting through the thick glass, creating shimmering streaks, just like his life. Glamorous, successful, yet empty. At 38, Alexander was the CEO of Hartman Capital, a colossal financial empire spanning across Europe, where every decision he made could shake the market. However, when the lights went out and the deals were done, he was left with nothing but himself, alone and adrift within the soulless opulence of his surroundings. That evening, after a tense board meeting about the company's expansion into the Asian market, Alexander felt an overwhelming need to escape the suffocating world of numbers and reports. On impulse, he decided to step into an upscale bar in Mayfair, a place where businessmen, politicians, and celebrities sought a brief respite from the relentless pressure of their elite lives. Stepping inside, he chose a secluded corner, ordered an expensive glass of whiskey, and let himself sink into the mellow rhythms of jazz music. The world around him buzzed with laughter and animated conversations about stocks, real estate, and billion-dollar deals. Yet none of it could fill the emptiness gnawing at his soul. And then she appeared. Olivia Brooks, a woman of striking elegance, with soft brown hair that framed her delicate features, and eyes so deep they seemed to hold an ocean of emotions. She walked to the bar with quiet confidence, yet there was an inexplicable sadness about her. A simple black dress accentuated her graceful figure without being ostentatious. Alexander couldn't take his eyes off her, not because of her beauty, but because of the quiet allure and composure she exuded. They started talking by chance, or perhaps as if fate had intended it. At first, it was just polite small talk about the cocktails she ordered and London's unpredictable weather. But soon enough, their conversation delved into something deeper. Olivia was unlike any woman Alexander had ever met. She wasn't interested in his wealth or career. Instead, she listened, and when she spoke, her words carried weight and meaning. "Life as a CEO must be fascinating," Olivia remarked, her eyes reflecting an uncanny understanding. Alexander let out a dry chuckle, swirling the whiskey in his glass. "Fascinating might not be the word I'd use to describe it. Success often comes with sacrifices, and sometimes you don't realize what you've given up until it's too late." Olivia nodded knowingly, as if she understood his words all too well. There are things in life that no amount of success can ever compensate for. Alexander found himself drawn to the sincerity in her voice. Every word she spoke, every subtle gesture, radiated a quiet elegance and an underlying sorrow that intrigued him in a way he couldn't explain. After a few more drinks, their conversation grew more open. Olivia spoke of her passion for art and her work at a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping women and children in need. The passion in her eyes as she described her work captivated Alexander. He wondered how someone like her could maintain such enthusiasm in a world driven by ambition and greed. The evening drifted by with a gentle ease. As the bar gradually emptied, Olivia stood up, her eyes shimmering with an emotion Alexander couldn't quite decipher. "Thank you for sharing this evening with me," she said with a soft smile. Alexander felt an unfamiliar urgency, an impulse he rarely allowed himself to indulge. "I don't think our story should end here," he said, his voice steady but hopeful. Olivia hesitated for a brief moment before offering a small nod. "I'm staying at the Ritz, room 1103. That night, within the lavish walls of the Ritz, they found an unexpected connection. They loved each other with raw honesty, stripped of wealth, stripped of status, just two souls seeking warmth in a cold world. But what Alexander did not know was that Olivia carried a painful secret, one she had never shared with anyone. As the first rays of morning sunlight filtered through the curtains, Alexander awoke to find Olivia gone. She had left without a word, leaving only a small note on the table. He sat in silence, running his fingers over the delicate handwriting, feeling a sense of loss he couldn't quite comprehend. Something deep within him told him that their story was far from over. Welcome to today's story. Let us know which city you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Alexander Hartman had never been one to pay too much attention to women. As the CEO of Hartman Capital, his days were filled with a relentless schedule: billion-dollar deals, high-stakes negotiations with the elite, and lavish parties that left no lasting impression. However, ever since that fateful night with Olivia Brooks at the Ritz, he couldn't erase her image from his mind. She was unlike anyone he had ever met. It wasn't just her captivating beauty or an air of mystery. It was the way she made him feel, something he had never experienced before, a genuine connection, a sense of peace amidst the chaos of his world. But when he woke up the next morning, Olivia was gone, leaving behind only a small note on the table with the words, "Thank you for a wonderful night. We shouldn't see each other again." Alexander sat in silence, his fingers tracing the delicate handwriting. Something deep inside told him that their story couldn't possibly end this easily. He was used to getting what he wanted, but this time it was something money couldn't buy: Olivia's presence in his life. Weeks later, Alexander attended a prestigious charity event hosted by London's financial elite. It was one of the annual galas aimed at raising funds for humanitarian organizations and networking influential individuals across society. As a principal sponsor of the event, Alexander was obligated to attend, though his mind was preoccupied with other matters. As he engaged in conversation with a few strategic partners, a voice on the stage made him freeze. "Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Olivia Brooks, Director of Development at New Dawn Foundation, a non-profit organization supporting widowed women and orphan children." Alexander's heart pounded as he turned sharply toward the stage. Olivia stood there in an elegant ivory gown, exuding both grace and quiet strength. She spoke with a warm smile, sharing stories of women struggling to rebuild their lives after devastating losses. Her voice was steady and full of emotion, as if every story she shared was a part of her own. He listened intently, captivated by her every word, and in that moment, he understood why he couldn't forget her. Olivia wasn't just an alluring woman. She was someone with a beautiful soul, someone who had dedicated her heart to helping those burdened by loss and hardship. When her speech concluded, applause erupted across the grand hall. Olivia stepped down from the stage, moving gracefully through the crowd. Alexander didn't hesitate. He made his way toward her, ignoring the curious gazes that followed him. "Olivia," his deep voice resonated, causing her to turn around with a slight start. A flicker of surprise crossed her face, but she quickly composed herself. "Alexander, I didn't expect to see you here. And yet, here we are," he said, a soft smile playing on his lips. "Perhaps it's fate." Olivia pressed her lips together, trying to mask her unease. "Are you here as a sponsor or to find me?" Alexander shrugged, his expression filled with quiet confidence. "Maybe both." Olivia let out a soft laugh, but Alexander noticed the subtle caution in her eyes. "I see you're still charming as ever," she said, maintaining a polite distance. "And I see you're still trying to run," Alexander replied gently, his gaze unwavering. "But I'm not letting you slip away so easily this time." Olivia glanced around the crowded room, clearly aware of the many eyes on them. She sighed and met his gaze with quiet determination. "This is not the place for whatever it is you think you're doing." "Then let's find somewhere that is," Alexander suggested. A moment of silence stretched between them before Olivia finally nodded. "Fine, but just for a conversation." Alexander smiled, knowing that a conversation was all he needed to reignite what had begun between them. As they stepped away from the crowd and into a quieter corner of the venue, Alexander felt a renewed sense of hope. This time, he wouldn't let her slip away without a fight. Throughout the evening, Alexander spent most of his time learning about the New Dawn Foundation. He followed Olivia as she introduced her organization, talking about vocational training programs for widowed women and life skills classes for orphan children. Her passion was evident in every word she spoke, her dedication shining through as she described the work they were doing to restore hope to those who had lost everything. "You seem very interested in our work," Olivia said as they stood by the bar, her voice tinged with curiosity. "Because it matters," Alexander replied gently. "And because you matter." Olivia sighed, her gaze distant. "Alexander, I think we had a wonderful night, but I'm not looking for anything more." Alexander held her gaze, unwavering. "Olivia, I'm a businessman. When I see something valuable, I don't let it go easily." She smiled faintly, but beneath it lay a deep-rooted fear. She knew she couldn't keep running forever, but how could she allow herself to open up when the pain of loss was still so raw in her heart? Alexander sensed her hesitation, but instead of deterring him, it only deepened his desire to understand her more. Throughout the rest of the evening, he watched from afar, listening to the way she spoke about the women she was helping, the way her eyes lit up with compassion. In that moment, he realized that Olivia wasn't just another woman he wanted to pursue. She was someone who made him want to change, to see the world through a different lens, one that wasn't solely defined by money and power, but by empathy and purpose. As the event drew to a close, Alexander walked Olivia to the parking lot. A fine drizzle hung in the air, wrapping the city in a familiar chill. Olivia pulled her coat tighter around herself, her steps slow, as if reluctant to leave. "Would you like to grab a coffee before heading home?" Alexander offered, his voice laced with a sincerity rarely heard from him. Olivia looked at him, her deep brown eyes reflecting uncertainty. "Alexander, I don't think we should get any closer. I have a past, and I'm not sure you'd want to be a part of it." Taking a step closer, Alexander gently took her hand, feeling the coldness and the slight tremble. "I don't care about your past, Olivia. I care about the present and the future." She smiled softly, but there was a lingering sadness behind it. Sometimes the past is too big to leave behind. Before Alexander could say more, she stepped into her car and drove away, leaving him standing in the quiet drizzle of London. In her heart, Olivia wanted to believe in Alexander, to take a step forward, but the fear of losing someone again, of experiencing another heartbreak, kept her from opening up completely. Alexander stood there, watching her car fade into the distance, knowing this was far from the end. It was merely the beginning of a challenging journey, one that required patience, understanding, and unwavering resolve to break down the walls Olivia had built around her heart. And somehow, Alexander was determined to be the one to reach it. Olivia Brooks had never thought she could love again. The memory of James, her beloved husband, still lingered like an unhealed wound. Every day she lived between two worlds, the present, where she devoted herself to charitable work, and the past, where James's shadow remained ever present, reminding her of a loss that could never be erased. Before James entered her life, Olivia was a talented programmer, working for a leading technology company in London. She loved her work. The lines of code and algorithms were a world of rules and logic, a place where she could maintain control. But when she met James, her life took an entirely different turn. James was an architect with a warm smile and eyes filled with dreams. He loved traveling, exploring the world, and constantly encouraged Olivia to step out of her comfort zone. They had a beautiful love story, one Olivia believed would last forever. Their wedding was held in a small town by the shores of Loch Lomond in Scotland, where lush green fields stretched to the horizon. Under the clear blue sky, Olivia had promised to love James for a lifetime. She vividly remembered the way he looked at her as she walked down the aisle adorned with hydrangeas, the gentle touch of his hand as they exchanged vows, and his radiant smile as they danced together under the golden sunset. But fate had been cruel. On their way back to the hotel after their wedding night, a truck lost control and crashed into their car. Olivia could still recall the moment, the deafening crash, the sound of shattering glass, and the acrid smell of smoke filling the air. She had been trapped in the wreckage, blood trickling down her forehead, but the only thing she searched for was James. He lay motionless, his eyes closed, and the hand that had held hers just hours ago was now cold and limp. She screamed his name, but James never answered. Olivia's world collapsed in that instant. She lost the man she loved most and the dreams of a beautiful future they had built together. The days that followed were an endless stretch of sorrow and emptiness. She abandoned her career in programming, left behind her previous life, and immersed herself in charity work as a way to escape the pain. Gradually, Olivia founded the New Dawn Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting widowed women and orphan children. She poured her heart into helping those who shared her experience, those who had lost everything but still had to find a way to keep going. Yet no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was living in the shadows of her past. Meeting Alexander was something Olivia never expected. He was everything that didn't belong in her world, a successful businessman, surrounded by wealth, power, and high-stakes deals. But beneath his polished exterior, Olivia sensed a loneliness that mirrored her own. Alexander made her feel safe, as if her world was no longer a lonely place. From the tenderness in his gaze to the way he never pressured her to open up, Olivia began to realize that she was feeling something beyond mere admiration. Yet every time that feeling arose, fear would quickly follow. She was terrified that if Alexander knew the truth about James, he would look at her with pity, or worse, walk away. Every time they met, Olivia tried to keep her distance, but Alexander was persistent. One afternoon, during a fundraising event for her organization, he stood beside her, watching the crowd. Then in a quiet moment, he turned to her and asked the question she had been dreading for so long. "Olivia, why do you keep running away from me?" She froze, her eyes betraying her turmoil. I just don't want you to expect too much." Alexander smiled softly, but his gaze was steady and serious. "I don't expect anything. I just want to understand you." His words struck deep within her heart. Olivia knew she couldn't keep avoiding the truth, but how could she tell him that she still loved someone who was no longer alive? That while her heart fluttered in his presence, most of it was still tethered to the memory of James? That evening, Olivia found herself alone in her apartment, staring at an old photo of her and James. His face, frozen in time with a smile full of life, stared back at her. The ache in her chest was still there, but so was the warmth of the memories they had shared. She thought about Alexander, his persistence, his patience, and the way he looked at her like she was the only thing that mattered. Could she allow herself to love again? She wasn't sure, but deep down, Olivia knew that at some point, she had to make a choice, whether to keep living in the past or to take a chance on a future she never thought she deserved. One late evening, as Olivia sat alone in her small apartment, the old memories came flooding back. She reached for a small wooden box containing the keepsakes of James, a wedding photo, a letter he had written to her on their first birthday together, and the wedding ring she no longer had the courage to wear. She knew she couldn't keep living in the past. But to truly open her heart to Alexander, she had to confront her pain once more. Finally, Olivia decided to meet him. In the warm glow of a riverside cafe by the Thames, she told Alexander everything about James, about their dream wedding in Scotland, and the tragic accident that took it all away. Her voice trembled as she spoke of the days she struggled to move forward, of the fear that gripped her at the thought of loving again. Alexander listened in silence, not interrupting, not judging. When Olivia finished, she lowered her gaze, bracing herself for his response. Perhaps pity, perhaps distance. But instead, he gently took her hand, holding it firmly, as if to make an unspoken promise that he wouldn't leave. "I can't replace James," Alexander said softly, "but I can be here with you, if you let me." For the first time in years, Olivia felt a glimmer of light seep into her heart. Perhaps by facing her past, she could finally start living for the present. And perhaps Alexander was the one who could help her believe in love once again. Gradually, Olivia began to open up to Alexander. It didn't happen all at once, but rather through a slow and delicate process, like the first rays of sunlight piercing through the overcast sky of her life. Alexander was in no hurry. He remained patient by her side, step by step, never pushing, never demanding. He accepted the moments when Olivia suddenly withdrew, just as he cherished every second she allowed herself to grow closer to him. At first, their meetings were simple dinners at a small, tucked-away restaurant in Chelsea, a place where Olivia felt comfortable, free from the opulence of Alexander's world. Later, there were long afternoons strolling through Hyde Park, where she could laugh freely with him without feeling overwhelmed. She loved the way Alexander told stories, a powerful businessman who somehow had a way of making her laugh, of making her feel at peace. "Have you ever gone out without planning everything in advance?" Olivia asked one afternoon as they sat on the grass, the soft golden sunlight casting a warm glow around them. Alexander chuckled, his gaze tender as it rested on her. "I suppose not, but maybe you could teach me how." And so the spontaneous adventures began. Olivia took Alexander away from the luxurious streets of London to the English countryside, where they wandered through the lush green fields of the Cotswolds, enjoying the crisp air and sometimes just sitting quietly by the river, watching the sunset in silence. Being with Olivia, Alexander realized she was unlike any woman he had ever met. She wasn't captivated by extravagant gifts, lavish trips, or elite social events. Instead, she found joy in the simplest of things: a good book, a hot cup of tea in the morning, and quiet moments spent with someone she trusted. However, things were not always smooth. Every time Alexander mentioned the future, Olivia's face would cloud with hesitation, her eyes would drift away, and her smile would become faintly strained. One evening, after dining at a riverside restaurant, Alexander gently took her hand as they stood watching the water flow past. "Olivia," he began, his voice deep and steady, "do you ever think about the future?" She remained silent for a moment, her eyes fixed on the far shore. "I'm not ready to think about that, Alexander. My life as it is, it's enough for me right now." "But I want more," Alexander said, squeezing her hand gently. "I want to know that we can go further together." Olivia slowly withdrew her hand, her gaze evasive. "Alexander, there are things in my past that I'm not ready to let go of yet." Her words formed an invisible wall between them. Alexander could feel that there was still something Olivia was holding back, a part of her life she wasn't ready for him to touch. But instead of pressing, he chose to give her time. Despite her lingering fears, Olivia continued to spend time with Alexander, cherishing every small yet meaningful moment they shared. Slowly, she allowed him deeper into her world. He met her colleagues at New Dawn Foundation, attended their workshops, and even made a generous donation to support programs for orphan children. One weekend afternoon, as they sat at a quaint cafe along the Thames, Olivia unexpectedly reached for Alexander's hand, a rare gesture of initiative from her. "Thank you for always being patient," she whispered. "I know I'm not the easiest person to get close to." Alexander smiled, pressing a gentle kiss on the back of her hand. "I can wait, Olivia, as long as you don't walk away." However, Olivia still couldn't escape the nightmares. There were nights when she would wake up in a cold sweat, haunted by the memories of James and that fateful night. She had thought she could overcome the pain, but every time she felt happiness with Alexander, guilt would creep in, making her feel as though she was betraying the love she had lost. One night while staying at Olivia's apartment, Alexander woke to the sound of her ragged breathing, beads of sweat glistening on her forehead. Without hesitation, he pulled her into his arms, whispering softly to soothe her. "Did you have the dream again?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. Olivia didn't respond. She simply gripped his hand tightly. For the first time, she didn't hide her vulnerability from him. In the days that followed, Olivia found herself caught in an emotional whirlwind. She wanted to believe she could love Alexander without guilt, but her heart remained torn between the past and the present. Late one evening, as Alexander walked her to her door, he looked into her eyes and asked, "Do you love me, Olivia?" She froze, conflict swirling in her gaze. I don't know, Alexander." "You don't know? Or are you afraid to know?" His voice was gentle but unwavering. Olivia took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her emotions. "I'm afraid that if I love you, it means I have to let go of James." Alexander cupped her cheek tenderly, his eyes filled with understanding. "You don't have to let go of anyone, Olivia. You just have to allow yourself to be happy again." His words left her speechless, a lump forming in her throat. She wanted to believe that she deserved a second chance, but the fear of losing again continued to hold her back. Although Olivia couldn't fully embrace her feelings for Alexander yet, his patience and sincerity slowly eased her pain. He didn't push her to forget the past. Instead, he simply stood by her side, offering his quiet support as she took hesitant steps forward. And while Olivia couldn't promise a future with him, she began to realize that perhaps she didn't have to live in the shadows of yesterday anymore. Perhaps Alexander was the light she needed to move forward, one step at a time. The days spent with Olivia had become the only light in Alexander's high-pressure life. But when an unexpected financial crisis struck, everything seemed to crumble beneath his feet. Hartman Capital, the financial empire he had painstakingly built, was now on the verge of losing billions of pounds due to a failed high-risk investment. Investors panicked. the media flooded with negative headlines, and the board of directors pressured Alexander into making tough decisions. Inside the top-floor conference room of Hartman Capital, the dim winter afternoon light cast a heavy atmosphere over the room. Skylar Monroe, his longtime associate and right-hand woman, stood before him with a stern expression. "Alexander, we can't keep pouring money into these vague charitable projects," she said, her voice sharp yet professional. "I've gone through the financials of New Dawn Foundation, and I have serious doubts about Olivia Brooks' intentions. Are you absolutely sure she's not taking advantage of you for funding?" Alexander frowned, a heavy weight settling in his chest. "Skylar, Olivia isn't like that. She dedicates everything to her work. That project is changing lives." Skylar stepped closer, placing a thick file on the table. "You're a businessman, Alexander. Don't let personal feelings cloud your judgment. We're losing millions every day, and relationships like this could make things worse." Alexander remained silent, his eyes fixed on the cold, hard numbers on the pages before him. He knew Skylar was right, but the mere thought of distancing himself from Olivia made his heart ache. "I can't do this to her," he said, his voice quieter than usual. Skylar crossed her arms, her gaze colder than ever. "So who do you choose? The company you've built your entire life around, or a woman you've known for less than a year?" Her words cut deep, like a blade slicing through his resolve. That evening, Alexander invited Olivia to his apartment. As she stepped inside, the familiar scent of lavender filled the air, a fragrance he had come to love since the first time they met. Olivia smiled warmly at first, but her expression quickly turned to concern when she noticed the tension on his face. "Alexander, what's wrong?" she asked softly, stepping closer to him. He turned away, unable to meet her gentle gaze. "Olivia, I think we need to put the partnership between Hartman Capital and New Dawn Foundation on hold." She froze, her eyes widening in disbelief. "Why? What happened?" Alexander took a deep breath, his voice strained. "The company is facing serious financial trouble. The board is pressuring me. They believe I shouldn't be involved with charity projects right now." Olivia took a step back, as if his words had physically struck her. "They? Or is it you?" He closed his eyes, trying to contain the storm raging within him. "I don't have a choice, Olivia." A bitter smile played on her lips. "No choice?" "Alexander, you once told me I was important to you, but now when it comes down to choosing between your career and me, you're choosing your career." The silence that followed was suffocating, heavy with unspoken emotions. Finally, Olivia turned away, her voice trembling. "I understand. I shouldn't have believed in a different ending." "Olivia, please." Alexander reached out, but she shook her head, tears shimmering in her eyes. "You don't need to explain, Alexander. Thank you for giving me a beautiful dream, but now I have to wake up." Without another word, she walked out of his apartment, leaving as hastily as she had the first time. Alexander stood frozen, his heart shattering as the door clicked shut. In just a few short days, Olivia packed up everything and left London. She returned to Scotland, the place that once marked both the beginning and the end of all her dreams. Back at her small cottage by the shores of Loch Lomond, Olivia felt an overwhelming emptiness. No more warm evenings with Alexander, no more gentle kisses or spontaneous trips. She returned to her old life, but this time, the loneliness felt even heavier than before. On misty mornings, when the lake was shrouded in a silvery veil, Olivia sat quietly by the window, gazing out at the scenery she once found so peaceful. But now even the familiar beauty of her homeland could not soothe the ache inside her. She threw herself into work, expanding programs to support local women, but each night she still felt an unshakable emptiness. She missed Alexander, his gentle gaze, his deep voice, and the way he made her feel safe. Yet she also knew that an insurmountable distance now lay between them. Alexander Hartman had never known emptiness like this before. Since Olivia left London, his life had lost all meaning. He used to believe that success, wealth, and power could fill any void within him. But now, facing this loss, he realized that nothing was more valuable than love and sincerity. In the days following Olivia's departure, Alexander buried himself in work. He continued to lead Hartman Capital, working tirelessly to stabilize the company's financial situation. But even as revenues grew and the markets recovered, his heart remained a hollow shell. Suddenly, everything felt meaningless. Memories of Olivia lingered in his mind, her smile, her tender eyes, and the quiet moments they shared. Each recollection played in his head like a slow-motion film, making it impossible to move on. He missed their morning strolls in Hyde Park, their impromptu countryside getaways, and the way she would touch his hand absent-mindedly, not realizing how deeply he had already fallen for her. Late one night, Alexander sat alone by the window of his high-rise apartment, the city lights shimmering through the thick glass. The whiskey in his hand had long gone cold, mirroring the chill in his soul. He looked down at the dazzling city below and asked himself, was everything I've pursued all these years truly worth it? And for the first time in his life, Alexander decided to let go of everything to seek out what he had lost. Are you still following the story? Let us know what you think about Olivia's decision. Without hesitation, Alexander booked a flight to Scotland. When the plane touched down at Edinburgh Airport, he rented a car and drove straight to the small town by Loch Lomond, Olivia's hometown, where she had grown up and where she had retreated to rebuild her life. As the town came into view, its quaint cottages, cobblestone streets, and the vast, serene lake created a sense of tranquility Alexander had never known before. Under the gray skies of Scotland, every step he took felt heavier, burdened with the uncertainty of whether Olivia would be willing to forgive him. After hours of searching and asking the locals, Alexander finally found her. Olivia was at an orphanage, dedicating her time to helping children who had nowhere else to go. From a distance, he saw her in a cream-colored sweater, her soft hair cascading down as she gently helped a young girl stack books on a shelf. Olivia looked more peaceful than ever, as if she had finally found a place where she belonged. Alexander stood still, watching her silently. He hesitated, afraid that his presence would disrupt the fragile new life she had built. But deep down, he knew that if he didn't act now, he would lose her forever. Taking a deep breath, he stepped forward, pushing open the iron gate of the orphanage. Olivia looked up, and their eyes met. In that fleeting moment, Alexander saw surprise, and beneath it, a guarded wariness. Alexander! Her voice was filled with astonishment. He nodded and offered a soft smile. I came to find you, Olivia. She gazed at him in silence, hesitation flickering in her eyes. Why? You don't belong to this world. I used to think that, Alexander admitted, but I was wrong. Instead of rushing to apologize or confess his feelings, Alexander chose to prove himself through actions. He volunteered at the orphanage alongside Olivia, helping with the children, fixing up the worn-out facilities, and participating in the life skills classes she organized. At first, Olivia kept her distance. She watched him with cautious eyes as if waiting to see whether his efforts were just a fleeting whim. But Alexander didn't give up. The initial days were challenging. Cleaning, caring for children, and manual labor were foreign to a businessman who had always worked behind a desk. Yet Alexander never complained. He patiently learned to listen and understand the needs of the children, gradually immersing himself in the values Olivia held so dear. He tutored Lucas, a young boy who had lost his parents, guiding him through his math lessons. He listened attentively as little Emily spoke about her dream of becoming a doctor. Slowly, Alexander realized that love wasn't something he could control or possess. It was something he needed to nurture and protect. One afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the horizon, casting a golden glow over the lake, Olivia stood beside Alexander while he painted the orphanage's old fence. You don't have to do all this, she said softly, her voice cautious yet gentle. Alexander wiped the sweat from his forehead and looked at her with unwavering sincerity. I need to do this, Olivia, not just to prove it to you, but to prove to myself that I can change. Olivia studied him for a long moment before a soft smile curved her lips. The smile Alexander had been waiting for, the one that told him there was still hope. In the following days, the distance between them gradually narrowed. Olivia no longer avoided him when he came close, nor did she hold the guarded look in her eyes. She began to share with him about her life in Scotland, about the little things that brought her peace. Alexander realized that Olivia was not just a woman he loved. She was a part of a life he had never thought he would yearn for, a simple yet meaningful existence. One evening, as they sat by the lake, Olivia softly said, Alexander, I don't know if I can love again, but I want to try. Alexander took her hand, his eyes lighting up. We can try together, Olivia, one step at a time. They sat there under the starry sky, feeling their hearts beat in sync, knowing that despite the challenges ahead, they had found each other again, in a way more complete than ever before. On a late afternoon, as the golden sunlight bathed the surface of Loch Lomond, Olivia gazed into the distance. The gentle waves lapped against the shore, blending with the rustling of the old trees. In that peaceful moment, she thought about Alexander's invitation, a candid conversation to clear things up once and for all. At first, she hesitated. She feared that seeing Alexander again would reopen old wounds, but it was that very fear that urged her to face the truth. In the end, Olivia agreed. At a small cafe by the lake, Alexander was already waiting. He no longer looked like the cold, perfectly polished man he once was. Instead, he seemed more subdued, his eyes carrying more emotions than before. Olivia stepped inside, feeling a mix of emotions. She sat across from him, and though there was a slight awkwardness in the air, the tension that once existed between them had faded. "Thank you for coming," Alexander spoke first, his voice warm but laced with unease. Olivia nodded slightly, stirring her tea, waiting for him to continue. "I know I made mistakes," he said slowly, his eyes filled with sincerity. "I let my fears about my career and responsibilities weigh me down. And because of that, I hurt the person I love the most." Olivia was taken aback by his honesty. She looked at him, seeing for the first time the genuine regret in his eyes. "I used to think that you only cared about yourself and your work," she said gently, her voice tinged with sadness. "But when I saw you at the orphanage, when I saw how much effort you put into helping those in need, I knew that you truly wanted to change." Alexander gave a faint smile. "I realized that everything I once pursued meant nothing without you by my side." Olivia remained silent, her eyes searching his, as if looking for something deeper. "You have changed, Alexander. But does that mean you're ready to leave everything behind and start a new life?" Alexander sat up straight, his face filled with determination. "No, I don't need to give up everything, Olivia. But I want to start over with a new direction, one where you will be by my side." He pulled out a simple plan and placed it on the table. Olivia looked at him curiously. "This project," Alexander continued, "is a combination of financial technology and philanthropy. I want to use Hartman Capital's resources to create a platform that helps those in need, widows, orphans, and individuals seeking financial support to start their own businesses." Olivia took the plan and skimmed through the preliminary ideas. She looked up, her eyes filled with emotion. "Do you really want to do this?" Alexander nodded firmly. "I don't just want to, Olivia. I need to. You showed me a world I had never cared about before, and now I want to contribute to it. Not just to make amends with you, but to create real change." She smiled softly, feeling an indescribable warmth. His sincerity, his effort, it all made her realize that Alexander was not the same man she once thought she knew. "But I'm afraid," Olivia said slowly, "afraid that one day you'll return to your old life. I've lost too much already, Alexander." Alexander reached out, gently holding her hand, squeezing it lightly. "I can't promise that everything will always be easy, but I can promise you one thing. I will never let work make me lose sight of what truly matters again. We can start with small steps. You don't have to forgive me right away, but please give me a chance to prove myself." Olivia looked down at the hand entwined with hers, a familiar warmth, yet one that felt distant. She knew that the past couldn't be erased, but perhaps the future still held hope. "So we'll work together?" she asked, her voice soft but filled with meaning. Alexander nodded, offering a sincere smile. "We'll build something better together." Olivia gave a slight nod, and for the first time in months, she allowed herself to feel a glimmer of trust once more. "Then let's begin." They left the cafe, walking along the lake shore, this time without avoiding each other. Their steps were slow but steady, as if they were rewriting their story together. Alexander felt a weight lifted off his shoulders. He knew that rebuilding a relationship couldn't be done in just one conversation, but Olivia's willingness to give him another chance was more valuable than any success he had ever achieved. The days that followed saw Alexander and Olivia working together on their new project. Olivia introduced him to her trusted colleagues, those who had stood by her side in building the New Dawn Foundation. Gradually, their ideas began to take shape. They collaborated with charitable organizations, financial experts, and technology specialists to develop an online support platform. This platform aimed to provide struggling women with access to microloans, financial management training, and entrepreneurial skills. Their work sessions were not just about numbers and logistics. They were filled with heartfelt discussions about dreams, past pains, and shared hopes. For the first time in a long while, Olivia realized that her heart was slowly opening up again, ready to embrace a new beginning, imperfect yet genuine. Spring arrived in Scotland, bringing with it the renewal of lush green fields and clear blue skies. In a small village by the shores of Loch Lomond, Olivia stood on the familiar path leading to the church where she and James had once exchanged vows. The gentle breeze played with her hair, carrying the scent of the earth, the sky, and the memories she had held on to for too long. Today was the day Olivia would bid farewell to the past. Holding a white rose in her hand, she stepped into the old church with a contemplative gaze. She placed the flower on a small altar that held memories of James and softly whispered, "James, I've lived in the past for too long. Today I'm moving forward, but you will always be a part of my heart. Thank you for all the beautiful memories. I hope you'll smile when you see me happy." Tears welled up in her eyes, but Olivia did not cry. Instead, she smiled gently, feeling a sense of relief she hadn't known before. Then she turned and walked away, leaving the past behind, ready to embrace a future she was finally willing to accept. A few months later, Olivia and Alexander co-founded the Hartman and Brooks Foundation, a charitable initiative aimed at bringing financial technology to underprivileged communities across the UK and beyond. Their first project was inaugurated in Scotland, a tribute to Olivia's homeland and a promising new chapter. The opening ceremony was simple yet heartfelt. The local community gathered to celebrate, and children ran around excitedly, their laughter filling the air. Olivia stood beside Alexander, her eyes shining as she watched her vision come to life. "We did it," Alexander whispered, gently taking her hand. Olivia squeezed his hand in return, feeling the warmth radiating from his reassuring touch. "This is just the beginning," she smiled, but her heart was full of hope. That evening, under the twinkling lights reflecting off the tranquil waters of Loch Lomond, Alexander and Olivia walked along the shore, the same place that had witnessed so many pivotal moments in their lives. Under the starlit sky, Alexander suddenly stopped and turned to Olivia. In his eyes was a determination she had never seen before. "Olivia," he began, his voice slightly trembling, a rare moment of vulnerability for a man of his stature. "I lost you once, and I don't want that to happen again. I don't know what the future holds, but there's one thing I do know. I want to face every challenge, every joy, and every difficulty with you by my side." Alexander knelt down and pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. When he opened it, the sparkle of the diamonds reflected in Olivia's eyes. But she didn't look at the ring. She looked at the man before her, the man who had shown that love was more than words, it was sincere actions. "Will you marry me, Olivia?" Alexander asked, his voice laced with nervous anticipation. Tears welled up in Olivia's eyes, silently rolling down her cheeks. She said nothing, just nodded gently. Alexander stood up and pulled her into his embrace, and she knew she had finally found where she truly belonged. A month later, in a small Scottish church, Olivia walked down the aisle in a simple yet elegant wedding dress. She moved gracefully towards Alexander, who stood at the altar in a sharp suit, his eyes softer than she had ever seen. This time, there were no painful memories of the past, no lingering doubts. There was only love and unwavering trust. Holding a bouquet of white roses tightly in her hands, Olivia walked towards the man with whom she would build a new future. Their vows were not extravagant, but they were heartfelt. "I promise to stand by you, not just in happiness, but in the toughest of times. I promise to love you with all that I have and to build a meaningful life with you." When the priest declared them husband and wife, the church erupted in applause. Alexander leaned down and kissed Olivia's forehead, and in that moment, she knew she had made the right choice. 2 years later, in their cozy lakeside cottage, the laughter of a child echoed through the air. Olivia sat by the window, watching Alexander play with their little son. Ethan, a bright-eyed boy with tousled brown hair and an infectious giggle. She smiled, feeling a happiness she had never imagined possible. Life was not always easy, but she knew she had chosen the right path. Alexander stepped into the house carrying their son in his arms, his face glowing with joy. "Our little man says he wants to be a businessman like his dad and a kind person like his mom," he said, placing Ethan on Olivia's lap. She laughed, looking into her son's innocent eyes. "As long as you're happy, I'll support you in whatever you choose." Alexander leaned down and kissed his wife's cheek. "And you, Olivia, you've made me a better man. Thank you for giving me a second chance." Looking back on their journey, Olivia realized that happiness wasn't something that happened by chance. It was a choice, one that required courage to let go of the past and embrace new possibilities. As the golden sunset bathed Scotland in its warm glow, she rested her head on Alexander's shoulder, silently grateful that fate had given them a second chance. To love, to live, and to create something more meaningful than anything else. Now they were not just lovers, but true partners on a mission to bring change to the world. And so, their love story didn't end. It was a new beginning, filled with hope and faith. Thank you for following our story. What do you think about this journey? Share